So hey, everybody tuning in. Let me just start by saying it is a real honor and a privilege to hang out again with Pastor Josh. You can tell that we like to joke around. We go back a little bit, and other folks at Hope Christian Church in Columbia, Illinois. We're happy to hang out with them too, even if it's just online. Over, gosh, maybe the last 6-7 years, Josh, we've partnered on a few different events, and I can say without any hesitation that Rethink 315, which is the ministry that I'm a part of, and of course me personally, that we're proud to publicly lock arms with your church, man. You guys have, and I know Pastor Daryl's here too, but over the years, you guys have really demonstrated what I see as a real commitment to taking people's objections and questions very seriously, but also to handling people's doubts and their hurts very tenderly. And so, Josh, Pastor Daryl, you guys are awesome, and that's why I'm here tonight. I mean, I'm happy to partner with y'all, and I know I can speak for the panelists too, and I'll introduce them shortly when I say that that's why they're here tonight as well. And so for those folks tuning in, for you folks, I think that's why you're here as well. That is, unless you tuned into the wrong live meeting. In such case, you're going to be disappointed if you don't see any TikTok dances or videos. Although Dr. McClyman, he might have a TikTok dance or two up his sleeve. We'll see. But all jokes aside, everybody on this Zoom and in this live feed, we really do believe that good questions deserve good answers, and we all believe that Christianity is unique in the marketplace of religions and ideas, and that, well, it's actually true, and because it's true, we believe that Christianity provides good answers to a lot of really good questions. Questions about the origins and purpose and meaning and ethics and life and death and afterlife and on and on and on. Now, of course, Christianity doesn't offer an answer to every question, but the big ones and the best ones are well covered, in my opinion. And so all that to say, the purpose of this event, and I know I'm speaking for Josh here too, because we've had a lot of talks about this, but the purpose for this event is twofold. One, we want to give everybody watching an opportunity to ask your most pressing question about God, about Christianity, about the Bible, about Jesus, about the church, etc., without any fear of ridicule or judgment. I'm one of the leaders at Rethink 315, and it's our joy as a partnering ministry to bring the right speakers to the right churches for the right events at the right time. And I can assure you that nobody asking questions here will be ridiculed or judged harshly. So if you caught all that, I'm glad. If you didn't, that's okay. If you want to learn more about Rethink 315 and our purpose and the folks that are involved, check us out online, rethink315.com. We do have a great panel tonight. A panel of thinkers who are here, and they're bringing with them a lot of education and a lot of experience, and I'll introduce them in just a second. But the second thing we want to do at this event, this is a personal conviction of mine. I want to personally clear up a serious misconception about Christian apologetics and Christian apologists. For those of you not familiar with the term, Christian apologetics has very little to do with apologizing for anything, although sometimes that's appropriate. But it has everything to do, Christian apologetics has everything to do with Christians offering a reasonable answer or a defense or a response to anyone who asks us questions about our beliefs. And so if you think about Christian doctrine in terms of what Christians believe, think of Christian apologetics in terms of why Christians believe it. We get this word apologetics from the Greek word apologia, and you'll find this word here and there in the New Testament, but excuse me, 1 Peter 3:15 is typically like the apologetics proof text. And a lot of you tuning in know this, and I see the names of a lot of the folks that are here. This isn't your first rodeo, but this verse in 1 Peter 3:15, this is the verse on every bumper sticker, on every car at the apologetics conferences, right? Like, this is the definitive verse. And it says this, it says, in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to offer an apologia or a defense or a reply to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that's in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And so that's what we're doing here tonight. We're offering a word back. We're answering questions. The panelists are here to offer an apologia, and they'll be practicing apologetics every time they respond to your questions. So what's the misconception I want to clear up? Well, there's a lot, but there's just one main one that I want to clear it up right here, right now. Josh, you may have saw this, but I conducted this informal poll on Facebook a few days ago, and I asked a bunch of people, like pastors and Christians and non-Christians, what comes to mind when you think of the term Christian apologetics? And one pastor friend of mine, Corey, he won the internet by saying, when he thinks of apologetics, he immediately thinks of nerds on the one hand and jerks on the other. So nerds and jerks. Those of us in the apologetics world know that there's not a whole lot we can do about the nerd stereotype, okay? However, we can, and we must, and we will tonight do something about the jerk stereotype. And I'm saying this as a recovering jerk myself. I don't know what it is about the discipline and the practice of apologetics, but it tends to attract, I wouldn't say create, but it tends to attract a lot of jerks, me being the chief jerk. But you don't have to be a jerk to be an apologist. You don't have to be a jerk to do apologetics, okay? And that's part of my mission here, is that we want Christians to, and non-Christians, to rethink how we're practicing Christian apologetics. And that means, as Peter said, doing this with gentleness and respect. And so as I wrap up here, I know that the speakers that I'm about to introduce are very good at offering intelligent answers to hard questions. But more important than that, they love Jesus, and they love people that love Jesus, and they love people that don't yet know or love Jesus, and they offer answers with gentleness and respect. So let me introduce my friends, these speakers. First up, in alphabetical order, we have Dr. Rachel Ferguson. Rachel Ferguson is a professor at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, and the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center at the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. Rachel's actually on my advisory board at Rethink 315, and obviously she helps to speak at different events. Rachel, can you hear me all right?
Yep, coming through.
Awesome. I'm really glad you're here. If you don't mind, maybe in just a minute or so, tell me a little bit about your research interests.
Well, at the moment, I'm writing a book called Black Liberation Through the Marketplace. And I'm trying to deal with some of the polarization and tribal kind of thinking that we're dealing with in our country. We all are very familiar with what's going on. And trying to address some of those issues kind of in a third way. I have some things that I think conservatives are right about. I have some things I think progressives are right about. And I have some things I think both are real wrong about. And so as a classical liberal myself, I'm trying to weave through the history of oppression of Black Americans and think about it in a totally nonpartisan way. And I think what we find is that there's been a lot of exclusion from economic exchange that involve things that matter to conservatives a lot, like private property rights and contract rights and markets and so forth. And so there's a way for conservatives to engage the topic of Black oppression really well and intelligently and sensitively. And I want to help them do that through the book, and also talk to progressives about some of the ways that we can address these issues that will really work and not fall into some of the pitfalls that we have with previous attempts. And so that's my big project at the moment. And you can check me out at rachelfergusononline.com. I have a couple of articles coming out next week, and publish little tidbits of insights from the book every couple of weeks online. So that's kind of my current thing.
Got it. Got it. And by the way, that sounds like a really simple task with a totally non-controversial topic. So,
That's
you know,
right.
if you were hoping to impress anybody here, I'm not sure it worked. I would say, so real quick though, in 30 seconds or so, tell me about your family and don't forget your now sentient humans.
That's right. So, yeah, well, I guess background wise, I was raised by an evangelical minister. I was raised by what I like to call the Jesus people of the 1970s. And they took the 1970s well into the 1980s. Anyway, and so that was kind of my background. You got baptized in the river, that sort of thing. And now I think come into, not only do I appreciate that tradition, but I appreciate really the richness of the whole Christian tradition. And that's been a big part of my journey. I'm married to Mike Ferguson, who's a radio personality in the state of Missouri. And I have two sons, Asher Duchant and Solomon Duchant, and they are 15 and 16 years old. Actually, Solomon turned 15 yesterday. So,
happy birthday, Solomon.
And I said, how do you feel about it? And he said, I don't know, because I didn't really experience being 14, with COVID. It was the missing year.
Stuck in a time loop.
Yeah, but they're wonderful young guys, and we're talking a lot about our faith every day, and trying to approach, really a lot of these social issues are on the minds of teenagers all the time, and so how do we bring our faith and our and bring a Christ-like attitude to engaging those sorts of things? So I talk about that with my kids all the time.
Yes. Well, you're a good mom and you're a good friend, and I'm glad to have you here. And we'll unpack some of those loaded terms you used earlier later in the conversation. But moving on, so I've got also here Dr. Chris Gadsden, and Chris is an event speaker for Rethink 315, but he also works through teaching, mentoring, speaking, and writing, especially in apologetics, to help create redemptive culture with Cru Arts and Culture. Cru, formerly known as Campus Crusade. His passion for communicating truth and defending the faith stems from his own conversion from atheism while he was an undergrad at Florida State University. That's exciting. I can't wait to get into that if we can. Chris earned his MA in Philosophy of Religion and Ethics from Talbot School of Theology, that's Biola University, and his PhD in Philosophy, Epistemology from the University of Missouri. And Chris, I'm glad to have you here. Can you hear me all right, buddy?
Yeah, I can hear you. Coming loud and clear.
Very good. Probably too loud, right? If my wife's right. Anyway, Chris, tell me about your website, Ground Belief. What's that? That web title is super cool. What is that? What's that all about?
Well, it's a popular form of epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge and evaluating beliefs. But really, the website is about helping people evaluate what they believe and how they come to believe it, so they can believe true things. That's what we want. We want to believe the truth. We want to have true beliefs that we have good reasons for too. We don't want to just get it right by luck. So that's what the website's really designed to do. It's kind of been on hiatus during COVID a little bit, but there's a lot of content on there, videos, all kinds of stuff.
Nice, very good. You also wrote, I was reading, and I didn't know this, maybe this was recent, but you wrote a chapter in a volume about Doctor Who, the very, very popular sci-fi series. This was Doctor Who and philosophy. Tell me about that. What was that all about? Yeah,
well, it's a collection of essays that kind of combine philosophy with Doctor Who. If you're going to be the ultimate nerd, I guess this is really what it's about. So if you like Doctor Who, it's an interesting book, but mine really has a little bit to do with ethics and just some scenarios in the TV show. So it was really a fun thing to do.
It sounds like it. And is that available like on Amazon or on your website?
Oh yeah, it's on Amazon. Yeah, I should put it on my website. I haven't done that, but yeah, you can find it on Amazon.
Well, you can thank me later, and you can give us at Rethink 315 a percentage of your royalties and book sales. Hey, so tell me, if you don't mind, real quick, tell me about your family. I know I got to meet Phoebe at an event that you spoke at a while back, and she was there at a summer camp. But Tell me about your whole squad. You got a beautiful family, Chris.
Yeah, well, my wife, Kristen, we've been married about 25 years. Absolutely love her. She's amazing. And I've got 4 kids. Phoebe is the oldest. She's 21. She's a junior at Mizzou. I have Clark, who's 20, and he's a sophomore at Mizzou. And William, who's 17. He's a junior in high school here in Columbia. And then Julia, who is 13. And they're all amazing, brilliant kids.
And everybody's wondering now, how old are you, right? How you look like you're about 30 years old, Chris. How do you have kids so old?
Hey,
how old are you?
You didn't tell me you're going to ask me my age. That's a little bit. I'm 51.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, thanks for being here. And I know, a lot of the philosophical questions will come your way. So some will go to Rachel too, but I'm super, super happy to have you on this panel. And we've got a lot of questions coming in, and we'll get to that shortly. We've got until about 9 o'clock. We won't go over that time. And it's possible that we might not take that much time, but I just want everybody watching to know that we do have plenty of time. So we're going to get to these questions here shortly. There are a couple ways you can ask questions. We'll get to that in a moment. Next speaker, though, that I want to introduce is my friend Kyle Keating. Kyle is an event speaker for Rethink 315 from time to time. He's also the Dean of Providence Classical Christian Academy in St. Louis, Missouri. He received his BA in political science from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and his MDiv from Covenant Theological Seminary here in St. Louis. He regularly teaches about Christian ethics and apologetics at churches and schools and college campuses, and he's written a bit for the Christian Research Journal, Mere Orthodoxy, there with Matthew Lee Anderson, and then also Christ and Pop Culture. Hey, Kyle, can you hear me all right? Are you there, buddy?
I sure can. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, it's always a pleasure to have you. Speaking of writing, you're a modest guy, but from what I understand, you were recently on a committee with Pastor Tim Keller from Redeemer Pres in New York City, a very famous pastor, author, speaker, and apologist. And you helped him and some others to write a major position paper for your denomination. What was that like, hanging out with Keller? Did you have any interactions, or were you just critiquing each other's notes?
Yeah, I mean, we sat around the table and I gave, Tim all sorts of advice about apologetics because I figured, he had a lot that he could learn from me. And obviously, Tim is an incredibly gifted speaker and apologist. And it was really great to serve on the committee. We were, it was on the topic of human sexuality, which is obviously a hot button topic in our culture. It's a hot button discussion in our denomination at the moment. And so, it was a privilege to get to serve alongside him and, some other faithful men who, had a lot of expertise in the field. And, I think, the report we put together was one that we're really happy with, and we hope serves the church.
Very good. I'm a little late, but I'm wondering, it's too late for me to get the autograph, but did he sign your shirt or anything?
No autographs.
I'm teasing. And, I know Pastor Keller tries to avoid the kind of celebrity status stuff, but anyway, this is pretty cool. We, a lot of us cut our teeth on some of his books and sermons, so that's pretty cool. You also, you have a beautiful family, and I'm just curious to know if you want to give them a shout out or say anything special.
Sure. Yeah. My wife, Christy, has been a Spanish teacher for the past 10 years in the Parkway School District. And she's actually in the middle of transitioning to school counseling. So she's finishing up her a master's in school counseling, and she's going to do that. And I've got a daughter, a 4-year-old daughter named Kira. So all that's great and keeps me busy. And yep. And then dean at school, and that's kind of my where I spend most of my time.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, thanks for being here, man. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Right.
So
real quick,
on to
Jeremy, real quick, let me jump in real quick because I just want to say, Kyle, for some of my students who might be watching, my former students, Kyle spoke at our youth group one time. It was a really powerful night, and just really appreciate him just taking the time out of his busy schedule to do that. And that was through a partnership with you as well, Jeremy. But Kyle, that was a really impactful night, and just want to thank you again for that, man.
Yeah, it's great to be back. I remember it well, and always glad to be with the Hope community.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Josh. We talked about that a little earlier, but yeah, man, for those students that benefited from that talk, that's it's cool to have Kyle back for sure. And then the last panelist is Dr. Michael McClyman. Mike is an advisory board member for Rethink 315 and also an event speaker from time to time. He's the professor of modern Christianity at St. Louis University. He is educated at Northwestern University, at Yale, at University of Chicago. Of all of us here, you know, Mike's got the longest bio, so I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. It's taken up about 4 or 5 gigs on my hard drive, though, so my computer's slow. Anyway, he held teaching or research appointments at Wheaton College, Westmont College, University of California, San Diego, Emory University, Yale University, the University of Birmingham in UK. He's written or edited, the number here is a bajillion, the bajillion books on things like Christian theology and comparative religion and biblical studies and contemporary issues. Mike, we could go on and on and on. Just maybe in a minute or less, if you don't mind. First of all, Mike, can you hear me all right? Are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. And of course, you just got the bookshelf. I've been to your office, man, and it is just wall to wall books. Like you really live.
It is.
So tell me briefly, like a minute or less, about your written work on Jonathan Edwards, and then most recently, some of the stuff you've been working through on the debate over universal salvation. Yeah. So Jonathan Edwards and universalism.
Well, during my time at St. Louis University, I was hired basically to teach in a department that emphasized the history of Christian theology. So for many years, I've had the opportunity to train not only undergraduates, but PhD students who are studying the great Christian thinkers through the centuries, early church writers, Augustine, Calvin, Luther, people like that, more recent figures. So I have had doctoral students who were Russian Orthodox, who are charismatic, who are Lutheran, who are Roman Catholic, Covenant Seminary graduates, a real mix. And so I have had the opportunity to learn, with them. And so, as Jeremy said, I published a big book on Jonathan Edwards, just called The Theology of Jonathan Edwards, 800-pager, 4 large projects, and the Encyclopedia of Religious Revivals in America. I did with Laman Sana, who was an African-born professor at Yale, a companion to world Christianity. And then finally, this massive, really 2-volume work called The Devil's Redemption, which is a kind of a playful title. And that was the critique of universalism. And that was the most work, and that's gotten the most attention. Now,
and Mike, hey, sorry to interrupt, but would it be fair to say that was kind of a late, but it was definitely like a response in a sense to Rob Bell's book and some of the popularity that, talk about that a little bit.
Well, in 2001, Time Magazine did a cover story. And, they used the major news magazines, they used to wait till Holy Week, the Easter, and then Christmas season to do something that would have a pro-Christian slant. Now they're doing the opposite. So they waited till Holy Week, right before Good Friday and Easter, and the cover was, "What if there is no hell?" And all I can say is it was just, I felt, when I saw that cover, it just seemed to me that this was really implanting doubts into many people's minds about the church, the teaching of Scripture and of the church on heaven and hell. And then I went into a Panera bread company, St. Louis bread company, and was a group of women sitting around. They all had the Rob Bell books, Love Wins. And then I started calling friends. I said, are you going to respond to this book by Rob Bell? Because wherever I turned, I kept finding references to it. And so it kind of fell to me to write a response. The response ended up so much larger than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, so much larger. It only took what, 20 years to get it out, right?
Well, it's about 4 years of just backbreaking work, because I cite about 3,500 sources in 5
Only?
languages. So 3,500
Only?
sources. Yeah.
Mike, you're a heavy hitter. You are
Well,
a
I
heavy
would
hitter.
say that, I'm a theologian who believes in staying grounded, though. In the last year, I went to northern Nigeria where Boko Haram is active. When I arrived there, I was told that sometimes visitors get kidnapped by the police or army officers. So made it back okay, but that was an amazing experience to see a church under persecution. Gave me a new point of view. Saturday mornings, I lead prayer walking in the city, and we pray at the site of where the murders occur. I actually get up early on Saturday. I see where the shootings have been. There's a group of about 30 people with me, and the Lord gives us
Combinationally diverse group, right, Mike?
exactly, very diverse. We are on literally Grand Avenue is the most dangerous road in America. And why do we do it early Saturday morning? It's probably the safest time of the week. The bad guys are sleeping. But any want to come join us, meet up at Fairground Park, you can do that. But that's that's a theology kind of on the at street level as well.
Got it. All right. So we're actually, believe it or not, we're right on time. We spent about a quarter of our time setting the stage for this talk and introducing our panelists. Just to give people a little idea as to how this is going to work. As I said earlier, we have until 9 p.m. So we've got a lot of time to take questions, and we'll probably do some deep dives here. You can ask your questions in 2 different ways. Number 1 is through the live feed chat. So I'm trying to look at that here, and I'm opening it up. We have a few already. And then also, if you want your question to be a little more private, or maybe you want to ask it anonymously, that number, and maybe someone can post this in the Facebook chat, that number is 618-224-1199. Again, 618-224-1199. We probably need that in writing somewhere on the Facebook chat, Josh, if you don't mind. But the first question is a real simple one. And, it's such a simple and easy question. I'm going to go ahead and hand it to Rachel because she loves simple and easy concepts. Rachel, can you hear me all right? I got a question for you.
Yeah, okay. I'm regretting agreeing to this. Okay, go ahead.
And we got a lot of these. I'll do my best to get to as many as I can. So every day, it seems like people are arguing and even dividing over politics. It's kind of a 2-part question. How did we get here as a culture, maybe as a church even? And how can we as Christians who love Jesus, how can we do a better job of navigating these hard conversations? I mean, it sounds like, as Christians, we have a lot of unique tools maybe, right, to help us through this. What are your thoughts on that, Rachel?
What a great question. Well, there are different theories about how we got here. I mean, one thing to say is to temper the observation a little bit and say that actually there have been extremely polarized and mean, political interactions throughout the entire history of the country. So I've had a couple of my historian friends say, oh, you wouldn't believe the stuff they did in the 1820s, So, we should have some perspective. I think we had a particularly sort of peaceful moment there for a while in the 90s, and maybe we got a little spoiled. And so, that's one way to think about it, but surely there's something very toxic feeling in the air. One idea is that it has to do with smartphones, that it's a product of a technological change. So in 2009, when we all kind of started having, these in our back pockets, all of a sudden by then you had a 24-hour news cycle. Now you're looking at it every moment, you're not doing anything else. And then people are commenting on social media. So you have a snowball effect is the point of kind of the technological changes that are occurring, and it brings the most extreme voices to the front. And then what happens is you feel like now you have such a level of extremism on one side, you've got to react to that, right? So everybody goes into reaction mode. and they're constantly ginning themselves up by reading the most extreme things that are being said on one side or the other, and then reacting to it. And in reality, but most Americans are not very extreme politically, and they don't say all of these crazy things on either side that we often hear, but it can begin to feel like everybody's splitting 50-50. And so, and there is has been a change in attitude. So for instance, if you look at some of the data on things like, how would you feel if your child married somebody from the other party? In the 60s or 70s, it was kind of like, I don't know, I don't care, right? And then over time, you can just watch the polling change where the two sides sort of purify. And I always shock my students. I'm 43, they're 20. And I shock them when I tell them, oh, listen, when I was young, there were pro-life Democrats and there were pro-choice Republicans, right? And so things were not quite as totally perfectly aligned as they are now. And then it started to become purer and purer on both sides, and there was less sort of crossover and bipartisanship. So, so there's a lot of theories about that, but I actually think that's a pretty good one. We saw some kind of nutty stuff around 2009 that get ginned up, and that kind of has gone totally out of control. I'm worried, very, very worried about the QAnon phenomenon. And if you Google American Enterprise Institute, they just came out with some data today, actually, showing that like a quarter of conservatives and an even higher number of white evangelicals have been taken in by the main core beliefs of QAnon, which is nothing but made up conspiracy theories. And so just in terms of the way we're getting our information and the echo chambers that we're creating in our social media worlds, the way we're curating the information that we get is really ginning up some crazy stuff. And I could give plenty of examples of crazy conspiracies on the left as well.
Probably important to note, just for the sake of balance here, that it is not as if one side or the other is completely immune to poor thinking and being sucked into silly ideas and conspiracy theories, right?
Absolutely not. I can give you so many examples on both sides. And, I'm talking about QAnon because I talk to conservatives more often than I talk to the left. And so I think let's police ourselves, so it kind of depends on who you're around. But I really think that's important. So I have actually been thinking a lot about our role as Christ followers, particularly since our own communities are falling victim to some of this. And I guess I'll just share some of the thoughts I've had for myself. I mean, for one, the Lord said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and so having an attitude of I am not coming in to stir up anger and resentment and hatred. I'm here to help people have better conversations, to help them understand one another, to help them be rational. We're also, as Christians, we're dedicated to the truth, and that's the only way out. It's the only way out of the whataboutism. It's the only way out of the conspiracy theories, of the, just some of the really extreme ideas, is to just anchor ourselves down to the truth, right? And so and sometimes the conversation gets so crazy that you have to just stop and bring your spiritual disciplines of silence, solitude, meditation that allow us, and prayer, coming before the Lord, allows us to calm our minds and our souls and ask the Lord, bring me back to the truth. What is the truth here? And I am on the side of the truth. I'm not on a side, in politics. I'm on the side of the truth, which means that I can say the truth to people of either group. And really either doesn't even make much sense, right? Because there's more than just two ends of the spectrum. And so I really think that our spiritual disciplines are what we need to return to right now, because we need to think about how are we behaving on social media? What are we letting into our minds? How are we allowing ourselves to evaluate it? Are we surrounding ourselves with wise counselors? And then when we present things to the public, whether it's on Facebook or just in conversations, are we bringing the love of Christ with us? And that means, to honor people in a Christ-like way involves telling them the truth. But as you said from 1 Peter 3:15, with gentleness and respect, right?
Yeah.
And so really I have tried to do things like, for instance, when someone tells their story of escaping from QAnon, I will post that and I will say, good for that person. That's courageous. I hope more people do this. We should praise and encourage people who are coming out of a very painful, what probably seems like a dream to them, and having to admit that they were wrong about something. And we should always be encouraging people to be able to admit they were wrong and to receive them back with grace. And so forth. So yeah, I think the importance of discipleship is central.
I appreciate your response, and there's a lot to get to there, a lot to unpack, but suffice it to say, well said. Mike McClyman, do you have anything that you would want to add to that? I know that you're thinking along these lines too a little bit in your professional sphere and space. What do you have to say about, and then we'll move on to the next question, but do you have anything to say about people arguing and dividing over politics particularly? And what do you have to say to Christians that are arguing and dividing right now? Like, how does the gospel, rectify this situation? How can we let it help us?
Well, first of all, I really think Rachel is really on target. I'm writing a book on Christian spirituality now, in which I'm talking about the disciplines of silence and of quiet and stillness before the Lord. One of my colleagues does a course on Christian spirituality, and the hardest exercise in the class is not for the students to give up food for a day, for those who've never fasted before, but to give up their internet connection and their smartphone. That's extremely disciplined. And that just shows the level of attachment. And all the classic authors talk about distraction and how this keeps you from really perceiving things clearly, perceiving God clearly, but even from perceiving the other person. Just very briefly, Plato told this famous allegory presented in his book, The Republic, in which these people live their whole lives underground. They've never been up to the surface, and they see the shadow play on the wall. And that's all they've ever seen. And they think that is their ultimate reality. And one guy breaks away from the group. He climbs up and he gets into the sunlight. His eyes are, it's painful for his eyes to see the sunlight, but he adjusts and he begins to see this whole landscape. He goes down, and in Plato's allegory, he tells the people what's up there. They don't believe him. And in fact, they gang up against him, decide he's a madman and he's dangerous, and they murder him to get him out of the way. And I'm just think, in some ways we're watching what the media is presenting. And as Rachel very aptly says, the most extreme versions of the reality that is out there, but curated in such a way as to provoke the most reaction. And people, that's the reality that people are exposing themselves to. So no wonder we feel anxious. No wonder, in my university, a quarter of the students are on Prozac or some kind of mind-altering drug. So there's a great, huge problem. The other thing I would just add briefly is secularization is a background phenomenon here. If you look at the history of Europe as it came at an earlier stage 100 years ago through the First World War, after World War I, there was tremendous disillusionment, loss of faith. People lost, they were sent to fight in World War I, to fight for God, for king, and for country. And they became disillusioned not only with country and king, but with God as well. And that's when you had these groups of far right and far left groups, like in Germany during the Weimar Republic, you had street fights. This is where Antifa came from. The anti-fascist communist youth would go beat up a fascist youth, and then they would go back and it would go back the other way. And this is happening because people have lost any kind of transcendent dimension. If there is no God, there is no eternal life, then the turf battles over the things we enjoy right now, those are ultimate. And I think what we're beginning to see in our culture is that people are fighting over things that as Christians we know don't even last, as if those are the most important things. And I have to hold on to, my advantage, my material things, my point of view over against others.
Mm. Mike, you cut out for a second there, but you said something that I thought was profound, and that was, the loss of the transcendence and the transcendent. Chris has an opposite story. Dr. Chris, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Hey, man. So in your bio, and this question came up, so you actually you found transcendence, or maybe said differently, transcendence found you, but you became a Christian in the university on campus, and you were an atheist. Can you tell us about that journey from darkness to light, from bad ideas to better ideas? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, my family, I was raised by hippies. Rachel was talking about the Jesus people. My parents were part of that culture, but they weren't Christians. And so I grew up really with no spiritual background at all. No church, no anything. They were into, if it was anything, it was maybe New Age spirituality or something like that. But so I really had no background. I had no idea of what the gospel was or anything. And I got to college. I was pretty well secured in my atheist views. I was also a very hostile atheist. So I like to argue with people. I still argue with people, but now I'm on the other side. But I like to argue with people, and I finally met one person in my junior year of college who wasn't intimidated, didn't mind arguing. So we would go back and forth. He was a Christian. And through a series of events, he invited me to this one particular event where I really heard the gospel for the first time clearly, and had just an experience where God just really made himself clear to me. And I decided to just jump in with both feet, just did a 180, and just became a Christian, gave my life to Christ. And it shocked a lot of people, as you can imagine. But it was really an amazing transformation. It was an amazing shift for me. It wasn't just an intellectual process. It was very much a spiritual and emotional process. But yeah, I mean, I just really had no idea what I was missing out there, because I never really had a good, clear presentation. I never had anyone who could respond to the things I was saying. So it wasn't until I got to college that I really finally met someone who could have a conversation. So
and that actually, that gets to the heart of the question a little bit better. So more specifically, what were some of the more compelling evidences, if you will, that helped you to, maybe not like, maybe it didn't save you per se, but when you became a Christian, you had a lot of questions and doubts. What were some of the more compelling evidences that really grounded you in your belief that there is a God, and that, that Jesus actually is who he says he is? What were some of those evidences, Chris?
Yeah, well, in the very beginning, it had to do with seeing the lives, hearing the stories, the testimonies of people's lives that have been changed. But as I began to get started in my Christian faith and started asking questions and finding answers, I think one of the first things that really helped me was understanding the origin of the Bible and some of the really great evidence that we have of its reliability. That was really powerful for me, because once I felt like I could really trust the Bible, it was that I just took off, because I just started reading the thing cover to cover. I was really excited to make it a part of my life. So that was a big first step, I think. After that, I started to read apologetics and even a little philosophy, and, arguments for God's existence were really powerful to me. Probably, starting to think about how science relates to faith was a big issue for me. So those are a few of the big ones.
Was there a particular, like maybe philosophical argument that was really like a grounding force for you?
Yeah, when I came in contact with William Lane Craig, who's a professor at Talbot, actually, and he teaches a number of places, but he's famous for the cosmological argument, or the Kalam version of the cosmological argument about that the origin of the universe is best explained by God causing it, and that was very powerful, because I felt like not only did I have a great answer to a question about whether there's a God, but it was an answer that I could share with anyone, not just a Christian, an atheist, because it was based on ideas that you didn't necessarily need the Bible to prove. And so that was a really powerful one.
Is there a way to explain the cosmological argument in maybe a sentence or two? Like, is there a simplified version? I mean, I've heard things about, there has to be an uncaused first cause. Can you simplify it for the person that asked the question and for those listening?
Yeah, well, you just did it. I mean, the idea is that everything that exists, that begins to exist, everything that has a beginning, has to have a cause. And that's just common sense. It's what science is based on, the idea of things having a cause. If they have a beginning, then they have a cause. And the universe, we have tons of evidence that the universe began to exist. It has not been here for an eternity. It's not infinite in time, that it had a beginning. And so since science supports that, then it must have had a cause. And when you think about, well, what would that cause be like? What would that cause be like? Well, it has to be something like God. It just turns out that it's going to be something like God, something that's not part of the universe. So that's a simple version.
That's really good. And for those listening and for those that are interested in these sort of philosophical concepts, I know William Lane Craig actually has a lot of really good animated videos on YouTube. You can find, I think, reasonablefaith.com. There's some stuff there, but the Reasonable Faith channel on YouTube, good videos. And I think, Mike McClyman had some interactions with Bill Craig. Did you study under William Lane Craig, Mike, or were you guys colleagues at one point? Remind me about that just briefly.
William Lane Craig was very briefly at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School before he became more of an independent speaker. And he wrote the letter for me to get my first teaching job. I mean, he played a big role in my life. I had the privilege of introducing him when he gave the Cadbury lectures at University of Birmingham in the UK. Now, Birmingham is kind of right just below Oxford or Cambridge. It's a great center for philosophy. And what was really interesting is all the atheist philosophers wanted to hear Bill Craig, because even though they don't agree with his belief in God, they know what a clear and incisive thinker he is. So that was really a privilege, and I had dinner with him, and he was just there to speak briefly. But he is just the preeminent, really apologetic debater. Debated. Right. Richard Dawkins will not debate him any longer, because Dawkins just got trounced when the most famous atheist in the world, when he debated Craig. So take a look at Craig's YouTube videos and the content on Reasonable Faith. There's just a library of material there.
A lot of good stuff. And you brought something up that takes me back to the question that we asked Rachel, but this idea, that different people have different positions, and then it's easy to divide over positions. But one of the things that's really helped me as someone who likes to talk with non-Christians that disagree with me, but also as someone who likes to talk with, maybe even Christians that disagree with me. And that's interesting too about this panel, right? Is we come from different backgrounds and traditions and disciplines, but I've heard someone say once, and this was just life-changing for me, that while we can disagree with people's positions, oftentimes we can actually respect and even agree with how they arrived at their positions. And that's where you find a lot of common ground, right? And you talk about folks, that are atheists that really respect Bill Craig because they know that he's arrived at his position, I mean, certainly by the power of the Holy Spirit and through the authority of Scripture, but also, using the faculties that God's given him, reason, logic, evidence, right? And while, there's a disagreement at the positional level, there's agreement in the way that we arrive to these positions. And that's a great way to find common ground with people. Moving on to another question here. And thanks, Chris, and thanks, Mike. And we knew we were going to get into this. We knew it. But this one's for my friend Kyle. Kyle, I do not want to pigeonhole you. I know you are not a one-trick pony, but because of the position paper that you helped to write for your denomination with Tim Keller, because of conversations that we've had, because of things that you've written and studied and talked about. This question's for you, buddy. Every day, it seems like people are arguing, and they're arguing about gender norms and sexual ethics, and things are so different today than they were even 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. How did we get here, and what's a proper Christian response to the changing cultural norms about sex and gender? Kyle, can you answer that in 30 seconds or less? Just kidding. Take your time, buddy.
Not 30 seconds or less, but I'll try and be brief. I mean, so I think the mistake that we could make would be to think that how we got here is as recent as the rapid changes, which is to say, like, we think, oh, well, it's really only since 2008 that you've seen significant shifts towards pro same-sex marriage, and even more recently than that, you've seen shifts towards affirming various theories of gender identity and things like that. And I think the mistake we could make would be to think, oh, these changes have their origin in this sort of very immediate history. And I think we're probably better off recognizing their roots go further back. Their roots go back to some of the things that others have already been commenting on secularization, the loss of the transcendent, the need to make the things that are in front of us, including ourselves, ultimate. So they're tied to all those pieces. And then especially when we think about the sort of modern sexual revolution that is usually identified in terms of the 1960s, but this shift of like, what is the place and purpose of sex in society, and this shift away from thinking about it in the context of family life and formation, and toward individual self-fulfillment as the primary purpose. And what's interesting is that a lot of Christians actually bought that understanding of what sex and marriage is for and sort of Christianized it. So, sex and marriage are really for are primarily for me to be happy. And that's why Jesus is on board with, sex and marriage. And then often the objections to same-sex relationships or gay relationships was, see, those are necessarily unhealthy. They're not monogamous. These are all these different reasons. And then the problem came when people started to realize, oh, people in same-sex relationships can have monogamous relationships, and they can self-report a high degree of fulfillment and happiness and satisfaction. And suddenly it was that if those things are actually what define the purpose of marriage and sex, then it doesn't make very much sense to say that you can only be married to somebody who's of the opposite sex. And so I think a lot of the work that is in front of us as a church and for Christians is to really go back and think through, hey, what is the meaning and purpose of marriage and sex, and seeing those two as tied together. Because I think if we buy the modern notion that sex is a way that you express yourself, is primarily about how you express yourself and your personal desires and identity, and that it's primarily about making you happy. If those are your two fundamental tenets of what the purpose of sex is, then you're necessarily going to conclude that sex shouldn't be limited to a man and a woman in the covenant of marriage. But if you rewind and actually look at Scripture and then the historic Christian tradition for 2,000 years, you see that actually neither of those things were the primary purpose of sex. That sex was defined far more by its ability to produce life, that procreation was a critical part of the purpose of sex and marriage, and that the diversity of genders, male and female, in marriage is meant to image the church, right? We see that in Ephesians, that the diversity of genders actually mirrors the difference that exists between Christ, who is God, and us, the church, who are human, and that difference is really important. And so things like self-satisfaction, personal fulfillment, self-expression, those things don't show up as sort of core parts of the purpose or meaning of marriage and sex. And so I think, recognizing, hey, when those foundational pieces aren't there, you're never going to arrive at the Christian conclusion with respect to Christian sexual ethics, especially with respect to same-sex relationships. And I think gender identity and sexual identity are often paired together in the same conversation. I think they're not there's overlap in those conversations, but they're not the same conversation. The places where I think there's a lot of similarity is in terms of recognizing, hey, what is the cultural environment that's made same-sex relationships plausible? Well, that same cultural environment is a lot of what makes some of the more recent theories of gender identity plausible, right? The idea that not just that gender and sex are different things, but that they're entirely unrelated, or that gender and the biological sex exists, should primarily be thought of as something that exists on a spectrum as opposed to something that is primarily binary. So I think the same things that have made same-sex relationships more plausible have made different views of gender identity more plausible. And the idea that I subjectively myself get to define reality for myself, right? There's no authority above me that can say anything about myself and my own experience and self-understanding that contradicts with my own inner desires or feelings. And so, that's what we commonly call expressive individualism, right? If you want to find out who you are, you look inside at your inner desires and you figure out, hey, which of those inner desires is the most core, most powerful, and that's who I am. And so if I'm going to live an authentic life, then I need to live that out as best as I can. And the Christian stories never said that. The Christian stories actually, when Jesus gathers his disciples, he tells them, take up your cross and follow me. That actually the way of Jesus is this way of putting to death yourself, including lots of your desires. And that's not just true for people that are same-sex attracted. That's true for anyone who wants to follow Jesus, right? And again, I think that's a place where the church maybe sometimes downplays that because, hey, we want to be appealing to people. We want to show them that the gospel will improve their lives. And yet there is this hard truth in in Jesus's ministry that being his disciple is a costly thing and it's a hard thing. And so, this idea that, to find myself, I really have to look within. I think, really what we see in the Gospels and then later in Paul's writing, especially, is that to follow Jesus, we have to often die to those desires that we have within, even when they feel like they're really natural to us, or they feel in some sense like they are who we really are. And that's not an easy thing to do, and it's especially not an easy thing to do alone, apart from community. And I think that's, if there's anything that I think has been really sad or difficult, it's that oftentimes people who deal with gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction feel alone in the church, right? And so then they leave the church because they're like, hey, I know I need community to survive, and here's this ready-made community over here, the LGBT community, that's going to welcome me with open arms. And I think that happens to a lot of people because none of us wants to live alone, and the life of following Jesus really can't be lived alone. And so I think that, I've kind of gone astray from the question a bit, but I think one of the burdens for us in the church is to say, hey, how do we come alongside people who experience same-sex attraction, gender dysphoria, especially in our cultural moment, and rather than sort of letting them be isolated, have them be, that they would be just as part of our community as anybody else.
Kyle, real quick, Kyle, when you one of the things that you brought to my attention when you spoke at our youth group many years back was this idea that churches just don't do a great job of that, like you just said. But you said a lot of churches will have like a singles ministry, but it's usually to pair up the singles, right? And really a singles ministry is the best place for people who are struggling with same-sex attraction that want to follow Jesus. Like there's got to be a better way to minister to them.
Yeah, I think the way I commonly put it is you can't really make it's hard to make Christian community plausible for somebody who's, let's say, in a same-sex relationship, apart from saying, hey, here's how you're going to belong in that. And the general script within the church is, here's how you're going to belong to our community. Even if you're single, you're going to get married, and then you're going to have kids, and then you're going to, do these various programs that we have that are mostly family oriented and those kind of things. And I think there's, especially within the Protestant church, the evangelical church, there's a lot of assumptions that singleness equals immaturity, that singleness, you're single because there's something, there's something wrong, right? Singleness is a problem to be fixed. And it's a foreign view, I think, to Scripture. I mean, obviously the easy example is to go to Jesus, who lives his life as a single man. And so I think that is probably, that's in order to, if you're talking to somebody who's in a same-sex relationship, same-sex attracted, and you're trying to make the pitch, hey, the church is the place for you, right? This is the community that can surround you and help provide the intimacy and belonging that you long for as a human being. Part of what you need to show is that doesn't have to mean getting married to somebody of the opposite sex. It could mean a life of chastity and singleness, and that would be a good and holy and fulfilling calling. Not easy, but marriage isn't easy either. I don't, those each calling has its own challenges and difficulties.
Kyle, I love 99.9% of what you said, and the other percentage is just something that I probably forgot. But I remember there was a speaker that we brought to town to talk to about 100 college-bound Christian teenagers, and this guy's name was Adam J. McLeod. If anybody wants to look him up, he's a Catholic thinker from Alabama. Natural law philosophy is his specialty, but also law in general. I mean, he's an attorney. He teaches law at a university there. But anyway, Adam said, and he said this from a Catholic perspective, right? And he knew that he was talking to a room full of Protestants, but this was 2015, and Adam said that, long before any of these current conversations about redefining marriage came up in our culture through the LGBTQ conversations, he said long before this happened, he said that Christians redefined marriage with no-fault divorce and, winking at adultery and certain views on contraception even. And he just went down a list of ways that we Christians, that we redefined marriage. So that's, point number one. I thought that was like a punch to the gut to me and a lot of students there, particularly in 2015, when these conversations about, gay marriage were just really is a hot topic. That's one thing to mention. And then the other thing too, just on a personal note, and you know my story and I know a little bit of yours, but I went through an unwanted and unexpected divorce around that same time. And we've had some talks about this, but I remember and I'm remarried now and happily and so thankful for my new family. But I remember that time of singleness was a really hard time as a guy working in ministry who, has all of his teeth and speaks in full sentences and, doesn't have any scandals attached to him. And that time in ministry as a single guy was really difficult, and mostly because my well-intended and loving Christian friends, they wanted to see me remarried, and they wanted to see me remarried quick. They wanted me, and they knew I wanted to be married. They knew I wanted kids, right? So this is part of the desires of my heart that God had given me. And yet at the same time, the best advice I got about singleness was not from my single straight friends. It wasn't from my single married Christian friends. It was actually from my Christian friends that struggle with same-sex attraction and are living a faithful life. And I don't even know if that's the correct term to use these days, but you know what I'm saying. Like, they struggle, they're attracted to people of their own sex, and for whatever reason, God's not taking that desire from them, but they desire to live faithful, committed, celibate lives, and they're fighting sin, and they're rejoicing in their singleness because they can dedicate their time without restrictions, without distractions to God, and imperfectly, but I remember, and I probably even risk like some weird jokes after this is airing here, but I just remember thinking, man, like it's my Christian friends that struggle with this, that are very faithful to Scripture and are theologically conservative and are aiming for celibacy, that have given me the best advice that helped me to seek holiness and wholeness as just a single Christian man. So anyway, I don't know. I mean, we're halfway through our time here, a little bit over halfway through, and I want to get to a few of these other questions. But do you have any more comments on that? Just because this is such a pervasive topic.
On the singleness piece, or gender and sexual identity in general?
The singleness, singleness piece, and the unique insight actually that faithful Christians can give. Faithful Christians that struggle in this area, right? Like the unique insight they have. I mean, I saw a brand of holiness and conviction that I wasn't getting that from my single straight friends that were Christians, and I wasn't getting it from my single married friends that were Christians.
Yeah.
It was weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think we talk about Jesus in the Gospels saying, "Take up your cross and follow me," and I think all of us do that in various ways in our lives. I think the thing for same-sex attracted people is that that feels so tangible and immediate, and oftentimes omnipresent at times. Whereas for most of us, I think we can actually like go through our average day, and like the notion that we're picking up our cross is maybe not something that we feel in any sort of immediate sense. And we might have our moments where we feel that, difficult things, difficult conversations, moments where following Jesus feels especially difficult. But I think for same-sex attracted people, that's sort of been often the warp and woof of their discipleship, and so they know that cost, and there's a commitment that grows because of that. I mean, there's been no easier time in history to shift your views on these questions and accommodate your desires, right? It's easier now than ever, and in fact, now there's a double cost to not doing that. It used to be before there was some sort of social cost to doing that, and so less people would be open or honest about their experiences or would pursue relationships. But today there's often a double incentive. Oftentimes the church is like, we don't know what to do with you. You'd be better if you were not here. And the culture is like, well, if you want to actually be, if you actually want to be fulfilled, if you actually want to have, intimacy, the only way to do that is to have, to follow your desires and pursue a same-sex relationship. And so in this cultural moment, for people to say, hey, yeah, that's my story, that's my experience, and be honest about that, which runs a risk of them, being ostracized in the church, while saying, but also I'm going to die to those desires so that I can walk with Jesus for a lifetime, and risk the ostracization of all the rest of their friends that are like, that's crazy. I think it's a sort of especially admirable thing in this moment, and I think that's maybe part of what you found in your conversations with folks like that, Jeremy, is that there's that deep awareness of what it means to take up your cross every day is a powerful thing that does drive a kind of discipleship and a holiness and following after Jesus. That's not perfect, obviously. It's imperfect like all of ours, but it's one that has sort of counted the cost in a tangible way. Especially in the face of a culture that says, hey, if you're not in a relationship, like there's something wrong with you. If you're not pursuing romance, like romance is essential to humanness, right? And a romantic relationship, sex, like these, if you don't have these things, you can't be fully human. And these people are sort of living contradictions to that. They're in much the way that of course Jesus was too himself. So
well said, Kyle. Well said. But before we move on to the next question, because a lot of the questions coming up, and questions even just in our culture, do revolve around sexuality and sexual ethics and Christianity. Do any of the other panelists want to comment briefly on anything that was just said? I know that was a large chunk of time, but I'm hoping maybe for other opinions if they're out there.
I think something interesting to contemplate. I don't necessarily know what I think about it, but it's interesting to contemplate how we perceive the task of the church. What is our ecclesiology? Because I really loved what Kyle said so much, because I relate. I think that I've been concerned sometimes that the churches in America, the sense that we need to be fighting the culture war, has distracted us from actually ministering to the people in the church. And when I think of the task of the church, I think of it as making disciples. In other words, training the people who are in the church to follow Christ. And so if issues of same-sex attraction arose, why wasn't our first impulse to serve those in the church who have that struggle? But it kind of wasn't, was it? Right? It was more about, well, what's happening in the outside culture and how can we control that or try and rein that in? And I'm not saying I know how to handle that balance exactly, but it's something that nags at me all the time, because I worry that the church is mistaken maybe about what its task really is sometimes. And so then we let people down. And in fact, the witness isn't what it might have been if we had simply said to our same-sex attracted members, let's think really deeply about how we can nurture your discipleship. So just a thought to contemplate.
No, I think it's a good thought, Rachel. I really do. So we have actually quite a few questions, and it looks like maybe a theme here. I'll try to merge and morph some stuff, but I think a theme here is the reliability of Scripture. I know Dr. Chris said a little bit ago that for him, one of those evidences that really got his attention was just how reliable he found the Bible. And I know when he says the Bible, he's talking about the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, and then each book is in some ways independent. But I know he's done some research on the different books and where they fit in to the historic timeline and the ways that we decide and determine whether or not these are truthful accounts and that they were written by people that were telling the truth about actual events and actual things that have happened. Without getting into the weeds on inerrancy, I'd actually love to hear from all of you about maybe whether it's the New Testament, the Old Testament, or even just a particular book of the Bible. Was there an anchoring evidence or proof that you saw, wow, this book or this particular author, Paul, Peter, whatever, an Old Testament, like this thing is so real and it is so true, and I cannot deny that this happened, that I have to do business with the information in here? Does anybody have a particular book of the Bible that they just lean on and what made that book real to you in terms of its reliability? Maybe just, I don't know, Chris, start with you, because you had kind of mentioned it earlier, and I'd like to get to this question that I think it was Brendan asked, but there are others too that kind of run to this umbrella.
Yeah, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm definitely interested in it. It really started back with Josh McDowell and all the work he had done on his book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And I mean, some of the things that were just new to me that, as far as how do you determine whether a book is accurately reflecting now what was written originally, right? That's one of the big questions is, has the Bible been changed? People talk about, well, it's like the telephone game, right? The message gets distorted over time from one person to another, but that's such a ridiculous analogy, because we can actually go back and look at like documents from the first century, like Greek documents, that were almost the originals, not the originals, but really, really close. So we don't have to rely on like a version of a version of a translation of a translation. We can see what was written in the first century and have a lot of credibility to those documents, because we have so many copies, far more than any other historical document. And so if we can't rely on, the Bible is actually representing what was written originally, then we can't trust any historical document. But we do trust all these other documents. We trust a lot of the historical writings from the ancient Greco-Roman world. We trust a lot of other historical documents. So that was a big one. I think over time, some of the things that have struck me have been things that you would never find in a religious book if it was being made up. Like if it was just being made up by people trying to make themselves look good, trying to make the church sound good, and trying to make God, and Jesus being portrayed in some really supernatural way. Things like, for instance, at the resurrection, the first witnesses of the resurrection were women. Now, in that culture, especially in Jewish culture in the first century, the testimony of women was not even admitted in court. And that would not be a reliable way to talk about the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. If you wanted to write a story as a Jewish man about who saw who saw Jesus resurrected, you would not use women as the main characters. That would be a huge mistake, and they would absolutely not do that. But the fact that they actually did indicate that there were women as the first witnesses means that they only would do that if it was actually true. They wouldn't do that if they were making it up. So there are a lot of examples of things like that they just would never do if they were making it up. They would only do it if it was true. That has been really persuasive to me as well. Yeah, that's just a couple points.
No, those are all very good. Thanks. I mean, thank you for unloading that. I heard, I think it was Dr. Frank Turek talking about embarrassing testimony. And, in the event that you find a lot of information that is embarrassing to the author, that it's very likely that person's just, telling the truth, or she is telling the truth. And there's certainly a lot of embarrassing testimony all throughout the New Testament, but even throughout scriptures, the Old Testament as well. And yeah, it's unlikely that people making something up would, willingly and knowingly make themselves look really dumb and really silly and really sinful. And not only that, but to not answer every theological question perfectly. I mean, if I'm making up a religion, I'm certainly not going to, leave those loose ends loose, right? So sorry, I'm rabbit trailing, but I want to hear from maybe Dr. McClyman on this. Mike, talk to us about the reliability of Scripture. What does that mean to you? What stuck out to you over the years?
Yeah, I'd like to share something about just one verse. And this just is a way of showing, and actually this is secondhand. This is about a man in India who knew nothing about Christianity, and he only heard this one verse, but this verse became very important to him as a witness to Christ. This just shows, this story, I think, shows that there are many things in Scripture that we kind of take for granted, and we don't realize the indirect witness that they bear to Christ. Well, he had heard about the story that Jesus, before he was betrayed and died, that a woman came in. Now, tradition says it was Mary Magdalene. She isn't actually identified, but in Matthew 26:23, after she has poured this perfume over his feet, Jesus said, she's anointed me for burial. So Jesus is anticipating his own death. And then he says, I truly, truly, I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the whole world, what she has done will also be told as a memorial to her. So can you all hear me? Okay, I'm hearing some feedback. Okay, so Matthew 26:13. So this Hindu man says, wait a second, this book was written 2,000 years ago, and it's describing an incident. How did Jesus know that the word, that this particular story was going to be known throughout the world? And then he suddenly reflects, wait a second, here I am in India. I'm part of the story. I'm myself part of the fulfillment of this very verse. Do you see where he was going? He thought, that's like supernatural knowledge, because we know that this book is 2,000 years old. So he begins reasoning like that. And I think there is so much in Scripture that in that way that is woven into the narrative that we don't commonly reflect on, that points to the accuracy of it on a predictive level.
Kyle, is there a comment or insight you have on the reliability of Scripture?
I think I'd echo the things that others have really said. I think the notion of the embarrassing testimony is always an interesting one. And, I think for me, the thing that was most persuasive was a lot of what, Dr. Gadsden shared about the historical reliability of scripture when you compare it to contemporary documents. So yeah, those have been a lot of the things that I've found persuasive as well.
Rachel.
Yeah, so this is maybe a weird approach, but Genesis 1 is just so important to me. And one of the reasons is because just to notice how bizarre the Jews are, the Hebrew traditions are in comparison to the rest of the pagan world. They're saying something so wildly different, having a story of creation, which is totally ultimate. So if you think of other stories of creation, you're always sort of starting with something already, right? The great turtle or, the demiurge or whatever. And this is nothing. There's nothing. And then there's something because God spoke it into being. So and this is long before Greek philosophy is contemplating these sorts of ultimate questions. So it's really stunning that this, little tribe in the middle of nowhere comes up with this. They're monotheists, which is totally bizarre. Everyone is a polytheist. Except for them. So that's weird. And so it's like, I guess I want people to think of the historian within themselves, get curious. Why would, we should be curious about this. Why would this little group have such a strange, odd, sophisticated, grand vision of the universe? And then to say that human beings are made in the image of God. And for me, a huge part of my confidence in the truth of Christianity has to do with the moral revolution that Jesus initiated, but the prophets were building up to, right? With the way that they talked about how human beings had to be treated, individual human beings, and ones that were useless to you, economically, that are a drain on your society. And yet we have to prioritize those people in a certain way. And then you have, of course, the medieval, hospitalers and these wonderful Christian movements, saving babies that were thrown out in the forest, making yourselves sick with the plague because you're taking care of pagan, of your enemies. This kind of behavior should once again make us very, very curious, because it says, though that spell of human power where might makes right. And if I'm bigger than you, I can do what I want with you. It's as though that spell gets broken by the early church. And then slowly over the centuries, people are becoming more and more sensitive to the moral implications of the idea that human beings are made in the image of God. And so we have to look at this and go, what is happening here? This is a very weird, interesting, special tradition that stands out in a way. And then, of course, as someone who loves economics, it works, right? It works when you have a system of equal law where you actually treat people the same in the legal system. Suddenly, people are freed up to exchange and innovate and make their lives better. And you actually start seeing the fruit of treating people with respect and dignity. And so you're also seeing it working where it looks like it shouldn't, right? It looks like it should drain your resources or something. And so anyway, I think that just the moral story is what has been so compelling to me.
That's actually a very good rabbit trail. And I maybe want to camp out here for a second. Rachel, I remember when you spoke to a group of, 100 some odd students a couple years ago. We worked together and talked a little bit about your views on Jesus's moral revolution. And I remember you saying that this Judeo-Christian ethic, while it's taken for granted today because it's kind of baked into our cultural sort of his history, right? And yet, like, this was totally scandalous to the folks that would have been hearing this or even writing this down for like the first time. this is good, and maybe you can riff on this a little bit, maybe even Dr. Chris as well, but more, because some of the questions are actually about like questions of basing morality on, you know, some weird book that was written so long ago, and yet it's like, man, we have here some insights into morality that, I mean, they're miraculous, like they're supernatural. Objectively speaking, this seems like this is so counterintuitive. Nobody could have made this up. Can you talk to that a little bit, and then maybe we'll have some other speakers talk to that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the others as well. I mean, one example I often use is Aristotle, who I love. I like Aristotle's ethics. I think he's a very insightful philosopher. But Aristotle, and really any of the Greeks, would not have approved of our ideas of charity. They have liberality, which is generosity to your friends, maybe to your city. You might donate, you know, a statue to the library in your will or something like that. But the idea that you have any kind of duties, or that it would be a good thing for you to spend your time on strangers or people who you're not related to, or who you don't have political ties to, it's not even so much that, I mean, they would certainly think it was foolish, but it also wouldn't even have occurred to them. It just wasn't even in the realm of their thinking at all. And, you know, the most charitable that you got maybe in Greece was, you know, a hospital for soldiers or something. You know, it was the city. It's what the city owed to those who fought for it. But the notion, like, you know, the hospitalers came up with this book called How to Serve Our Lords the Sick. And they would give up all their wealth and then build this huge castle, and then go out in the streets and find sick people to put into this thing. And it was like the sheer size and volume of these projects was so stunning to the historian, you know, to historians who now look back at records of it, because it was just gargantuan. And I think Aristotle would be, he would think it was incredibly foolish. He would be totally bowled over by that idea, by that Christian idea. And so, you know, I think sometimes we, like you said, we take it for granted, and so we forget that in the pagan world, this did not exist. We didn't have these ideas, and it comes from the Judeo-Christian scriptures. And so I'll let others speak.
Anybody else want to riff on that? I think it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, I think another thing that's interesting to point out is the treatment of women, and how that has changed, been radically changed by the Christian, but by the teaching of Jesus and the apostles. Aristotle and a lot of the early philosophers did not have a very high opinion of women. It's really sad to read some of what they wrote. And historically, you know, of course, we know how women had been treated in the ancient world. And of course, the church itself has done a poor job historically in a lot of cases in their treatment of women. But the church has struggled to actually catch up with what Scripture actually says and what Jesus actually taught. And we're making progress, right? But if you take a map of the world, and you take a map where, and you could Google this, you can Google like human rights maps. And you look at a map of where women have the best treatment in the world, and where they do, you know, have colors where women are treated well and where they're treated poorly. And then you take a map of where Christianity has spread and where it thrives. They will almost overlay almost exactly. And where the Christianity has gone, where the gospel has gone, women have been treated, the treatment of women has gone way up. And I think that's an amazing testimony, because again, that's another thing that we would never have gotten from the ancient world if it hadn't been for Jesus. And the way he radically changed how people thought about women and the treatment of women and the status of women in society. And that's been a wonderful thing to discover. And again, people look at the church and say, well, wait a minute, the church has been oppressive to women, but that's because the church has not been, you know, really keeping up with what Jesus actually taught. So I think that's a great testimony as well.
To appreciate the radical nature of the Christian message and its social impact that both Rachel and Chris have touched on, you have to get outside. You have to really get far away from it and look from outside in. And there's an interesting story. The first Christian missionaries that went into China encountered these Confucian scholars. And now the Confucian view of society was it was very hierarchical, culminating with the emperor at the top. And then, in the Chinese language, there's a different word for the brother of your mother and then the brother of your father, two different words for uncle. It's extremely intricate, and you have to use the right titles for everything. And Confucius said rectification of names, get everyone in their proper place in this hierarchy. Well, the missionaries come along, and one of the Confucian scholars said, these Christians say that the emperor is brother to the beggar on the street corner. And they said, that is insane. It's like, and it's vile, and it's slanderous to say that all men are brothers. So that's their initial reaction. And I think, wow, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, do we really believe this? Do we actually act like we believe it? But it is a radical message and utterly transformative when the Christian gospel truly takes root. So the people who are kind of halfway in between Christianity and secularism think, oh, we don't need Christianity. Oh, they have no idea that they are actually the beneficiaries of centuries of Christian teaching and culture around them that ensures that we don't live in a society of a rigid hierarchy in which everyone just stays in, like a caste system where everyone stays in their own place.
I call it gospel capital. They're riding on gospel capital.
Can I jump in here too? I think, at the risk of walking into my one-trick pony thing, I think one of the places where we see this in terms of Christian morality is in terms of our sexual ethic. So we think of the Christian sexual ethic as like in our modern culture as this really repressive thing that really limits freedom and things like that. But when you look at the ancient world into which the church entered, it was a world where sex was a commodity that was, and the sexual economy of the ancient world was defined by social status and power. And if you had social status and power, you had, basically carte blanche and, access to do what you wanted with whom. And if you didn't have social status or power, if you were a slave, oftentimes women didn't have those kind of protections. And so Christianity comes in and says, hey, actually, the predominant thing that defines and determines the sexual lives of people isn't who has the most power, but rather this sort of notion of covenantal commitment, right? This super consensual relationship. It's not just two people saying yes right now, but it's two people saying yes for their lifetimes. And so I think, there's a great book that scholar Kyle Harper wrote called From Shame to Sin. And he's talking about what he was kind of called the first sexual revolution, which was the Christian sexual revolution in the ancient world. We often think of the sexual revolution of the 1960s, but anyway, that's another place where I think, Christian morality actually pushed back against the cultural norms of the ancient world in ways that today we ought to be very grateful for.
Well said. Well said. And so we are coming up to the last, looks like 20 minutes or so of our time together. And a lot of questions are coming in, but there's one in particular that I think is, we're probably all sick of talking about it, but it's a good question and it deserves a good answer. I'm going to try to shorten it a bit, but the question has to do with racism and racism in our country, racism in the church. Clearly, we do have a checkered history as Americans. We have a checkered history as Christians. What does genuine repentance look like in our cultural moment, like right now, knowing what we know? And what are some ways forward that are, honoring, let's say, the gospel and Jesus and each other, but are also, and hold on, and this is a lot of this is based on Tavish's question. So Tavish, I don't want to butcher this, but I do want to shorten it. What's a way forward And why does it seem so difficult for Christians particularly to come to grips with our own checkered history? What do you guys have to say about this? And again, Tavish, I'm sorry for butchering your question. Just trying to shorten it up a bit, but it's a good question. I think it's a good one to ask. I want to spend about 10 minutes on it, and then I hope the last 10 minutes we can talk about Jesus. Anybody want to jump in on that one? Rachel, I know this is something that you've spent a lot of time writing and thinking about, and you've got a pretty unique perspective and pretty diverse group of folks that you're chatting with about this. You want to jump in here a little bit? Was the question clear enough?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's very hard to thread the needle correctly here, because you have some ways in which the current state of, well, what do I want to say? Some ways in which words are being used differently than they used to be used. And some people are using them one way and some people are using them another way. And so, for instance, when we talk about systemic racism, well, historically, you can see this very clearly, right? And so, obviously, right, we have Jim Crow laws and FHA, refusing to insure homes and all sorts of things. So it's systemic because it's in the law and it's racist. But now we're dealing with the fallout from that, right? So we're dealing with the consequences of that, but not necessarily with currently racist law, although, there's tidbits, right? Like the different penalties between crack and cocaine, that are more recent and look like they're probably kind of racist. And sometimes things that look racist are actually classist. And so that can be confusing too.
Good point.
So I mean, it's very hard to slice and dice all of this. I think the best thing we can do is to really just tell the truth about our history. Because I think that if we were to more readily acknowledge our history, then it's okay to then say, we've addressed some of the, or most of the legal issues, if not all of them, but the problem is really cultural at this point, right? It's a feeling of not having the history not be acknowledged. And so, and the other thing I want to say is that it really depends on what community you're in. So I think if you're in the white evangelical church, you probably need to do a lot of work to have relationships with your brothers and sisters in the Black church, to have partnerships and familiarity with that tradition, to appreciate the incredible accomplishments of that tradition. It's a huge contribution, cultural contribution to American life. And to tell the truth, because the white evangelical church did not do a good job historically with race. It's just, we didn't. And so you have to go back and you have to deal with that. On the other hand, here's me, I'm a white evangelical, right? I'm also in the academy. Now, if you jump over to the academy, you can see almost the opposite problem, right? Where now I've got the idea of racism as America's, historical sin. And so now that's the lens through which I analyze everything. And it becomes the transforming one explanation for every single problem that America has. That's never true, right? It's never just one thing. It's never a monomaniacal focus on one cause. It's always complex, right? And there's always more going on than just one thing. But our post-Enlightenment minds, this is kind of the disease of the Enlightenment mind, is that we always want to pick one thing. It's going to be our first principle. Jonah Goldberg calls it one thingism, right? And then that becomes our lens and everything is transformed, right? And so if I'm looking at the academy, I can say, look at those crazy people. All they talk about is race, okay? But if I'm not in the academy, it doesn't matter, right? If I'm in the white evangelical church, then rather than pointing my finger at how crazy the academy is, I need to just deal with myself. I need to deal with the structures that I'm a part of. If I'm in the academy, then I need to be careful about going too far with some of these explanations, and making sure we appreciate the complexity, and making sure we talk about the progress we have made, and making sure that we don't only think of people in terms of identities of victimhood, and hitting that balance, I think, is really important, and knowing what community you're in and what that community needs is part of the story as well.
I just want to jump in and echo the thing that Rachel made, the point of we just have to tell the truth about our history. And part of I teach, in addition to being dean, I teach U.S. history, and one of the things that I think I found so powerful is actually learning the history. And I think there's a lot of ways in which the prerequisite to teaching the history and what is knowing it. Like, you think if I'm sitting down in a sort of a counseling environment with someone, the first thing I'm doing is asking questions and listening to find out what's the background, what's the history, what are all the things that brought them to the place that they're at, that they're sitting on the couch in front of me. And so when we ask questions about the racial tensions and challenges in our culture today, to do that without thinking about, hey, what is the history? What is it that is informing these discussions today? Like that, I think, Rachel, you're exactly right. That's got to be the prerequisite. And a lot of times I think it starts with, us saying, hey, what is our history? And doing the reading and research and realizing, hey, as someone like myself who grew up, in the North, where Jim Crow was more subtle, and it's easier to sort of shrug and say, hey, we didn't, that wasn't part of our history, even though it was in its own way. But to read about, hey, the Great Migration, or all these different sort of historical events can be really helpful.
I myself would strongly emphasize a relational approach. If you are a white person and you do not have a close, confiding relationship with a Black friend, pray to the Lord to open the door for that for you. If you don't know anyone who's Asian, if all your connections are in one part of your city and not in another part, because there's Black poverty, there's also white poverty, there's Latina poverty as well. I remember in Connecticut, some people saying, Stamford, Connecticut, there are no poor people. And someone who was experienced in ministry in the area, he says, when you exit Interstate 95, do you go north or south? I go north. He said, try going south. Sure enough, there's a group of very impoverished people in an extremely wealthy area overall. So, if you just go on the basis of a book you read, you can easily be persuaded that, as Rachel was saying, that like race is the number one issue that kind of is driving everything wrong with America. Or you could, in other environments, be persuaded that it's not an issue at all. Kind of like, oh, well, Martin Luther King, he dealt with that, right? And it's like, you have to actually have a friend, and you talk to your friend, and that's going to help you actually see, listen to that person and find out what their experience. And then that person you need to reverse too, so that person listens to you talk. This is what I have experienced in life, and this is how I feel too. If I feel that like I'm being put into a box because of my race, because I'm white, because I'm Black, because I'm Latina, because I'm Asian, Native American, whatever. And so it's the problem of the fragmented church today, that in 11 o'clock being the most segregated hour of the week in churches, is that we don't have these relationships forming naturally. We actually have to, from our church environments. I went to a large white, just one brief story, large white evangelical church they'll go nameless, one that you probably recognize the name. And I listened on the 4th of July. I was a visitor there. And it was a celebration of America. And it was like, nation favored by God, the faith of the founding fathers, the wisdom of the Constitution, the revival history of America. And, this is a sermon on just connected to 4th of July that I think was just like one day off. So it got to like the 20-minute point, and I thought, okay, well, he's going to mention slavery at some point, like that it wasn't all, a land of freedom for everyone. And then it got to 25 minutes, and then it got to 30 minutes, and I started to get alarmed. I thought, he's going to preach for like 40 minutes and not even once mention the fact of slavery in America. And then I got to about the 43-minute point, and I look around the room, and there were 1,000 people, and there wasn't a single Black person. And I thought, you know, this is one of the fruits that you have of a racially divided church, is like, if there had been a few Black congregants, that minister, I'm sure, would have had some of his Black congregants come to him and say, you know, you didn't even include us, because we weren't among the people that came for freedom to America. We were the people that came unwillingly into bondage, from freedom to bondage, not from bondage to freedom. So our story is different.
And it's, by the way, thank you guys for commenting. And I you know, the irony is not lost on me that we're answering this question, you know, with really, you know, 3 white guys and a white gal and a couple of white pastors. And yet, when I think of diversity, and this is true, I think of the whole Rethink 315 team as, you know, it's certainly not less than cultural and even just, you know, something as just obvious as skin tone. It's not less than that. But man, it is so much more. I mean, I'm so pleased even here in this group to know that there's a diversity of, you know, theological sort of distinctives. There's diversity of philosophical maybe viewpoints, certainly denominational, diverse family. You know, we have a couple blended families in this group. The couple, you know, it's like that diversity, this word, I think, is so loaded these days, and it's carrying a meaning that, I don't know, maybe makes it harder for certain evangelicals and white people, particularly in some of our circles, my circles, to like embrace it. But I've always, man, I actually love this about Christianity, is that if you kind of jump out of your church and your squad and you look, if you're Pentecostal, you hang out with the Calvinists. If you're Reformed, you go hang out with the Pentecostals. Mike, I know you love this, but if you're, you know, if you're in a predominantly white church, like go see what the Korean church is all about. Gosh, talk about an experience there. If you're hanging out with people that only believe, you know, a certain interpretation of end times eschatology, or have a certain view on baptism, or they, you know, like, man, meet people that are different. And I'm not trying to like change what you said. I'm just trying to add to it that if you don't have any Black friends, of course, go meet some Black folks. But beyond that, if everybody in your crew has a similar sort of way of viewing the world, you might need to diversify your Rolodex a bit. You might need to seek out relationships and conversations and community with people that are different. And of course that means, you know, different colored skin, but it's so much more than just that. I mean, I know folks that, you know, they've got a lot of, actually, I'm rabbit trailing now. Moving on to the next question. Thank you guys, by the way, for that contribution. Thank you for the question, Tavish. And last one, and I would love to hear from everybody on this. And this is kind of a combination of a lot of questions that I hear. What makes Jesus unique? What makes Jesus unique? And I'd love for everybody to talk about this. And if nobody talks about Habermas's, you know, 12 historical facts, I'll try to end on that. But what makes Jesus unique? Chris, Dr. Chris, we haven't heard from you in a while. Can we hear from you?
Wow. Yeah, I when you first said that, I thought, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. So feel free other people to jump in, but wow, what makes them unique? You know, one thing, I will say this. A couple of years ago, I took a class in grad school on Indian philosophy, like from India. And because there was a component in our program, you had to have a little bit of diversity, right? So I studied a little bit of Eastern philosophy. And one of the things I noticed was there are a number of Eastern thinkers, or even Middle Eastern thinkers, who have talked about what it means to be wise, and you know what it means to have wisdom, and all of them have said some similar things with this great humility. Like Socrates was famous for saying, you know, the reason why I know things is because I'm the only person who realizes that I don't know anything. And so I don't know anything, but I know that. And so I have this advantage over other people. And there are other philosophers, and Confucius, other people have said similar things, this humility about, well, I don't know, I don't really know as much as people think. I have this humility about my knowledge. I don't have all the answers. And so you see this real self-deprecating approach with these philosophers. And then Jesus comes along and he says the complete opposite. He actually says, no, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I actually do know. And he doesn't self-efface at all. I mean, he's come straight out and just says that he knows, he has the answers. And he actually is the answer. And that's a pretty big contrast to a lot of the other religious leaders and philosophers of the time in the ancient world that admitted and said they didn't really know things. But Jesus was very different in that respect. So that's one thing that just came to my mind.
It's a great answer. Kyle, what makes Jesus unique in your view?
I think, I've been reading a book by a pastor named Dana Ortland called Gentle and Lowly. And it's about the heart of Jesus. And, when you just reflect on like how Jesus responds to people who are weak, who are powerless, who are sinful, who are in the middle of their worst decisions of their lives, it's like it's remarkable, the patience, the mercy, the kindness, and I think like that's the thing that I find most unique about him, because I'm like, I don't find that anywhere else. Like, you definitely don't find that in our cultural moment, that weakness or mistakes are met with kindness and mercy. And so it's one of the things that I think actually makes Jesus most unique in our moment, where everyone's ready to jump on you the first mistake you make, that Jesus is there for every mistake that you make, and he doesn't go away. He doesn't get tired of us or bored. And I think that's a remarkable thing.
Well said. Rachel, what makes Jesus unique?
Well, as time has gone by, I've felt more and more that we don't understand Jesus at all if we don't understand the story of the Old Testament. And Jesus is not inventing a religion. He's not starting a new religion. He's the fulfillment of everything that was promised. And he's quoting the scriptures constantly. He's clearly just, totally marinated in the Old Testament. And so if you see God as taking the family of the Hebrews on a journey to get to know him better, and then to have Jesus finally appear when the time was full, right? When it was time, and say, if you've seen me, you know what God is like. That would be very, very good news if God is like Jesus, right? Jesus had some very good news for us if that's the case. And so I think for me, what's very important is that he is the fulfillment of that longer story. And of course, will finally be the fulfillment in terms of the restoration of the whole universe.
Well said, Rachel. Dr. Mike, let's hear your thoughts. I know you wrote a book on the historical Jesus, but I don't know what direction you want to go. You get to close us out here with your thoughts on what makes Jesus unique.
And I can do it in 3 words. You do it in 3 words. I was asked to lecture while I was living in California on comparative religions to group and to identify what was unique about Jesus. And so I talked about 2 Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and then the 3 monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And I wasn't deliberately looking at this, but I came up with a 3-word answer: birth, death, resurrection. Birth, incarnation. The other faiths, there are holy books. God remains in heaven, sends inspiration down to the writing of the book. Jesus is the living word. No other faith even makes that claim, that God is, I am the truth, that the word, that God's truth becomes personal. Death. Other teachers of religions teach how to live. And the Buddha at the end of his life said, do not follow me, I do not have the Dharma. I've given you the teaching. You have to follow the teaching, work out your own salvation. Jesus, when he dies upon the cross, is, in the biblical presentation, the full atonement. He is salvation. Salvation is relationship with him. No other faith presents salvation that way. Islam says no one can bear the burden of another. Each must carry his own load. Christianity says he bore our sins in his body that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. Okay, so that's the, and then finally, only Christianity says its founder is no longer in his grave. And so the resurrection claim, and I think I'm on good grounds with not only the New Testament and William Lane Craig, but we have the evidence of history to confirm that. So those are 3 points that are all very, very distinctive of Christianity versus those major faiths, and I think any other faith tradition.
Well said. So it is on my clock 8:59 p.m. We had mentioned earlier that we're not going to go past 9, but Josh was gracious enough to say we don't have a hard stop. So I'll just talk for maybe 30 seconds here and just thank the panelists. I want to thank Josh and Daryl, Hope Christian Church, all the folks with your questions, texting in on Facebook. Some of the ones that we had even talked about before this event began. Like, this was a lot of fun, and I just want to thank everybody that tuned in. Josh, if I understand correctly, you guys are recording this, and so this might be available to folks at a later time. Am I right?
Yeah, so it'll be, for those that are members of our online campus on Facebook, it'll be just archived in one of our guides there, formerly known as units, but it'll be in there. But if anybody wants a copy of this, I'd be happy to, if you could send me an email at josh.boyer@hopeforhim.com, and I'd be happy to get this to you guys via Dropbox link or something.
It's awesome. So if somebody that we know maybe on the Rethink 315 side, if they weren't able to tune in live, but they wanted to check it out later, what you're saying is they could get in touch with us, and I can get in touch with you, and we can connect you guys, and you can get them a copy, right?
That's right.
Very good.
Right.
Hey, so it's 9 o'clock. Do the panelists, do you guys have anything that you want to plug or announce before we wrap up real quick? Any upcoming events or books you're releasing or things that you're really focused on right now that you want people to know about?
I'll jump in real fast and just say, I need to think of how I can get the information to people, but I'm having Lucas Rugley of Love the Lou speak at Lindenwood for Black History Month. And he's speaking with Lenny Barber, who works at Love the Lou as well. And one of the reasons I bring that up, it's going to be February 25th, and it's a Zoom call like this one. And we asked about how we could move forward and what are good solutions. We didn't spend as much time on that question, but Love the Lou has the solution, which is personal presence and neighborhood stabilization. And this is the way to go. And we need to, in my opinion, flip our philanthropic models at our churches and go in the direction of Love the Lou. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, poverty alleviation that really works, let me know, or Jeremy, maybe we can put it on the Facebook page or whatever, and I'll give you the link to register for that February 25th.
Yeah, that'd be good, Rachel. If you get a minute after this, just go to the Hope Christian Facebook page where this live link is, and maybe post that in the comments. Yeah. Real quick question. Love the Lou is, we have a mutual friend, Marco with Gateway Metro St. Louis. Is there some overlap there?
Yeah, well, Lucas is very cooperative. So, his whole model is about people working together, and not being competitive between the different groups. So, yeah, Marco's a huge supporter of Love the Lou, and we all are together in Gateway to Flourishing, which is Christian business people trying to have a better philanthropic model. So there's a lot of wonderful things going on, and Mike McClymonds is a huge force in St. Louis for unity and prayer and healing and racial healing. And so there's so much hope in our city in spite of our struggles. And so I'd love for any of you to get involved in any of those efforts. There's a lot of great stuff.
Post a link in the comments, Rachel. Kyle, do you have anything interesting coming up? You're going to be hanging with Tim Keller soon. Maybe you can invite me this time.
No, but I'm always happy to plug our school. We're small. We are like a hidden gem in South County, St. Louis. So if you're looking for a private Christian school, Providence Classical Christian Academy, I'm a firm believer in what we're about, and so yeah.
Yeah, and you guys are meeting live, right? Not just online. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're in person 5 days a week. Yep.
Very good. Hey, Dr. Chris, what's going on with you, man? You want to mention the website again, or do you have anything else coming up?
Yeah, feel free to take a visit to groundbelief.com, like ground beef, but ground belief. Check out some of my blog posts, some videos, audio, a lot of great resources, and feel free to, you can message me there or send me an email if you have questions. Yeah, that'd be great.
Certified grade A beef can be found there. We're not talking about just spiritual milk, y'all. All right. Graduate from milk to meat. And then Dr. McClyman, I don't want to leave you out. What's coming up? You have any projects in the works that you can talk about?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to say to Kyle, my PhD advisee, Chris Crane, was the headmaster at Providence, your school, I believe. So this is quite a few years ago. But anyway, so there's a connection there. And then I have just a direct dovetail connection into something that Rachel mentioned. And even in terms of the name, there's Love the Lou. There's also Pray for the Lou. And actually there's an excellent website. I didn't design it. It's Kurt Wilson's website. I work alongside of Kurt. Kurt took on himself the initiative of praying in every one of the 79 neighborhoods in St. Louis. He started in 2020, or excuse me, he started, no, I guess it was 2019, and went all the way through in from the dead of winter. He said, I can't ask people to go and pray in all these neighborhoods unless I'm willing to do it myself. So he did, started on the north side, worked all the way down to the south. Then he very energetically was able to find host churches in all of the 79 neighborhoods of the city. And amazingly, it happened last 314, like the area code 314. Well, the plan is to expand into the suburbs this year. So if you are anyone on this call watching right now, if you want to participate in a true citywide movement that is going street by street, all the way through the neighborhoods and areas and municipalities of our city, go to Pray for the Lou. There's instruction. There's a 1-minute video to show you how to do it. Sign up yourself. Talk to your pastor about participating. There's information there on how to get involved. But there's going to be a final event. Last year, it was the very last day before COVID put the restriction on it. It was amazing that it happened just before the door closed. About 400 people came to a high school field to gather together. And these are all people who had prayed on site. And the field was literally right on the Del Mar Divide. So it was a symbolic thing that we were standing, it was black, it was white, it was city, it was county, it was young, it was old. It was a very diverse group, all different denominations praying. So it's going to be awesome. The prayer day is 313 and 314 is going to be services in churches in the area that are connected with this. So hope you can get involved. Pray for the Lou.
I love it. And if every one of you can just, maybe go back to the Facebook page and put some links in here for everybody watching, that would be super helpful. Hey, Josh, as you close out, do you mind if I just say one last thing as a shameless plug for Rethink 315?
Please do.
Oh, dude, thank you so much. So Rethink 315 is, we're denominationally diverse. And we do that on purpose. I don't actually agree with everything that my friends believe, and we respect each other nonetheless, and we really honor the way that we arrive at these different positions and conclusions. Of course, everybody affiliated with Rethink 315 would adhere to the fundamental, foundational Christian beliefs, even the weird stuff. And yet, we come at it from different angles and we have different distinctives. But because we're denominationally diverse, we play nice with everybody, but we get money from nobody. That being said, we are supported by individual donors who love Christian apologetics, but they love it being done in such a way that nobody leaves feeling like they were talked down to, or that they were made to feel dumb or small. And of course, we're not perfect, but we are as concerned with our tone and our posture towards hurting and curious people as we are with providing good content. And so if that's something that matters to you and you want to support this St. Louis-based ministry, www.rethink315.com/donate. That's all I got to say. Josh, thank you so much, man. This was so much fun.
This was fun. I felt like I was just in a class where my mind was blown so many times. It was great stuff. I want to thank all of you guys for being here, taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. And man, it means a lot to us and to the kingdom for what you guys are doing. I do want to just ask Pastor Daryl, if would you much mind praying for us all and closing us up?
Maybe so. Yeah. Hey, thanks all of you.
Yeah.
Father, thank you. God, we have brothers and sisters, God, to love one another, to go through this life, to sharpen one another, God, to hear each other tonight, and even differences, Father. God, I'm going to pray that you'll just honor that, and to God, that we would work together to help unite all brothers and sisters in Christ, and God, to actually do it in such a way that God, the world wants to be a part of it because they see the way that we love one another. And Father, I just thank you for that. Thank you for all the people here on tonight, and God, for all their gifts and their sharing with us. And God, thank you for the blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys all so much. You have a great night. Thank you for doing this, and thank you guys for watching and sticking with us for so long. We'll see you guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.